Welcome to Aging Matters. Today we're going to talk about advocacy for residents living in long-term care facilities. Whether it's moving into a nursing home or a personal care home, these transitions can be very challenging and come with a lot of change for the residents. They can also be very difficult for loved ones who are trying to support these individuals through the transition and their new life in these facilities. So today we're going to talk about making a successful move, getting to know key staff, understanding how facilities work, and how to address and resolve concerns. I'm Katie Catchmark. I'm the Deputy Director of the Berks County Area Agency on Aging, and I'm very happy to have with me our two long-term care ombudsmen, Carolyn Pirtle,
Hello, thank you.
In addition to her time with us as an ombudsman, she's a licensed social worker with experience in long-term care. And then we also have Lisette Mendez, who, for anyone who has lived in a long-term care facility in Berks County, probably has seen Lisette at some point. She's been an ombudsman with our office for 14 years and brings a lot of experience understanding different families, the issues that they face, and a vast knowledge of our facilities. So let's get started with Lisette. This word ombudsman, I don't think people know what that means, so can you just fill us in?
Sure. So an ombudsman is an individual that is an advocate for residents in long-term care facilities. So that would include anything like your personal care homes, your skilled nursing facilities, and of course your what they call the assisted living facility, which we have one. And then adult daily living centers that we also have one. But we are an advocate for residents in those types of facilities. And we visit unannounced, and we visit with the residents to see if they have any concerns, and we assist with any issues that they're having.
Great, so when we talk about residents of the facilities, do they have to be senior citizens?
No, as long as they live in that particular facility, doesn't matter the age, they are now a resident in that facility, or if it's someone that is getting rehab services in a skilled nursing facility, that is someone that we would also visit.
So they could be long or short-term residents?
Correct, yes.
Right. And so, Carolyn, when we think about advocacy, what does that idea of advocacy mean to you?
So advocacy, in my mind, is kind of two-pronged. The first would just be self-empowerment, that the resident would feel like they have enough behind them to be able to advocate for themselves, to empower them with education and encouragement to do that. But then also advocacy could be assisted by someone like Lisette or I. Sometimes that means speaking on behalf of the resident. Sometimes that means speaking with them, depending on what they're comfortable with.
Great. So towards the end of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about how the two of you as professional ombudsmen would get involved. But I think really one of the goals we want to talk about is how residents and family can self-advocate. So let's start by talking about getting set up for success when you're moving into a facility, which, as I said, could be very stressful. Carolyn, what are some tips that you give people to start that relationship off well?
So I really urge families and residents not to be scared to introduce themselves to staff. Direct care staff, so nurse aides that you're seeing, as well as administrative staff. I think having a good rapport with the administrator of a building is a great way to start off well, start off positively. That way you both have that connection. If things should go south, you kind of already have that there to be with them and say, this is what's going on, how can you help me in this situation?
Yeah, and I mimic that. With regards to open communication, I think it's also important that the family include the loved one, the resident that's moving, right? Because oftentimes we have these discussions with the staff member, but no one's including the loved one that's now moving from a home or an apartment now into a facility. So it's very important from the very beginning, if this is something that the family's thinking of doing, moving mom or dad into a long-term care facility, having those discussions ahead of time so that it's not a surprise for that individual when they show up to a facility. Allow them to tour, allow them to speak with other residents before that initial admission where they are now a resident to that long-term care facility.
And then you and Carolyn talked about introducing yourself to the staff. So how does that happen? Do you just walk in and shake hands, or what are some keys for that?
What do you think?
Well, I would say with regards to if we're speaking family, I think it's always important to let the staff know that you're there. In most cases, it's probably the receptionist you're going to see first, and then ask that receptionist, who's the social worker or who's the wellness director, so that if you have a concern for mom or dad, that would be the liaison. And then, of course, who's the administrator? Because we know that an administrator in a facility oversees the staff. And then if it's like a skilled nursing facility, ask who that director of nursing is. But most cases, it would be as you're coming into the facility, connecting with the receptionist. And if the receptionist isn't there, it could be a social worker that you can connect with first, and they can bridge that communication.
And I would say too, just bouncing off of that, to make sure as a family member that your contact information is up to date with the facility.
Correct.
If you see the nurse who, hopefully she's not giving out medications, he or she, but to say, this is who I am, this is the best way to contact me, and I'm available if you should need something.
Yeah.
And so if your loved one is moving into a facility and there's a lot of change and a lot of maybe feelings of loss, most times people aren't very happy to go, even if they're willing to go. It's not the environment they want to be in. What are some tips to make that transition go smoother?
Oh, well, like I said, definitely allow the older adult or the individual moving to be a part of the process first and foremost. And then also allow them to also be a part of how do I want my furniture arranged in the room? What items do I want to bring with me in the transition? And then also allow that room or the bedroom or wherever they're going to be moving into to look as homey as possible. Because oftentimes when they move in, if the family doesn't bring their personal items, it can be very sterile. There's no home feel to that placement.
And so Carolyn, once they're there and you start meeting people, do you have any tips for the family to stay organized, to know what they've talked about and who they've talked to?
Yeah, I think Lisette and I both have given this tip to countless family members. We both recommend having a notebook set aside just for your loved one's care. That way you can write down, on this date this happened, on this date that happened, especially if you're in a nursing home where it's a little bit more complicated, maybe lab results are coming in. Oh, when was the last time I spoke to the physician about that? You can keep note of that. Or who was that nurse that was on duty? They really seem to know what they were talking about. I want to make sure I remember who they were. Anything like that to keep things kind of in a chronological order, because it can be extremely overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And so you talk about families helping to communicate. Should families appoint one person, or can any family member call in? How does that work?
My advice would be that the family should have one point of contact, so that that individual can make that communication, build on that relationship with the staff, and then that family member can then provide that information to other individuals within the family. And of course, allow the resident to be involved as well, because even though you're the contact person, if the facility staff are expressing their concerns to you as that contact, but not including the family has no idea, the resident has no idea that these types of conversations are going on. So always at least a point of contact with family, but also include the resident if they're able.
And does that point of contact have to be a power of attorney?
No, it could be anyone that the resident may say, no, you know what, I'm the point of contact. You speak to me, but there have been cases where individuals will say, well, I would like for you to call my daughter. My daughter takes care of everything. If they have a POA and they wish to have the POA, that's great. But the staff should always be speaking with the resident and letting them know what the communication is all about, and then include the family if the resident allows.
Mm-hmm.
And so Carolyn, once they're settled in, families and residents start to hear a lot about the care plan, or maybe called the service plan. So what is this and how is it developed? Who participates?
So a care plan or perhaps a support plan in a personal care home are rather similar, but the basic outline is, let's say, a problem or a diagnosis, something of concern, and then how the facility plans to address that. So that is usually done, hopefully done collaboratively with the resident and with the family if the resident chooses to come up with a plan together so that everybody is on the same page. Like, let's say a resident has a diagnosis of depression. What are the things the facility can do to help support that resident? Because that's something the resident is the expert in, probably, if they've been dealing with it for some time. So it's a good time to bring them together as a team. I think that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. And so can a resident ask to see their care plan?
Absolutely. It's well within their rights to see their care plan, to have a copy of the care plan, and to say, you know, I want my daughter to have a copy of it as well.
And so I think sometimes, you know, people may hear that there's like an interdisciplinary team that developed this care plan. Who's on that team?
So typically you'll see the social worker, hopefully a nursing representative, dietitian. I've been to meetings where the activities person has been involved. I think that probably hits most of, sometimes the therapy staff, especially if they're there for rehab, that can be a key player. I think that hits all of the major players, yeah.
And what role, I'll ask you this, Lisette, does a physician play in developing care plan or giving orders?
So, yeah, the physician has a very important role because whatever medication the individual needs, it obviously comes from the physician. If there's some restrictions that the physician feels that the resident should have, these are all things that they can enter into the support plan or care plan, and then that allows the staff to say, okay, this is provided by the physician, therefore we must follow those directives, those steps that the physician has put in place.
And so kind of switching gears and starting to talk about, we've introduced ourselves, we're having good communication or trying to, we have this care plan, but then a concern comes up. And I know that's where you get involved a lot and this idea of advocacy comes in. So within the facility, how do you start addressing these concerns?
So with regards to the Ombudsman program, how we get involved is when and if the individual calls us directly, and that could be a resident or a family member with a complaint. So what we try to do is if the person's in a nursing home, based on the Department of Health regulations, that nursing home has to have a grievance form. The grievance forms are great to have completed because then that holds the facility accountable to then address those concerns and have an appropriate time to come up with a plan of correction. Why I say that grievance form is because if they're in the nursing home and they speak to an aide about a complaint, the aide leaves that room, goes to another room and forgets that that individual had an issue, there's no paper trail. With regards to a personal care home, most personal care homes don't have a grievance form, but we always say you might want to talk with the wellness director, or if they have a care coordinator that they can bring their complaint to light, because if the staff aren't aware that you have an issue, how do they address it? So our goal as Ombudsman is to educate. Who do you speak to? Encourage, please speak to them, and then empower to say, you know, you're a resident here and this is why it's important to speak up.
And so you mentioned, you know, the aide is leaving your room, they're heading in the next room. So that's probably not the best time, right, to express your concern. You know, what would be the most productive way and who to talk to about that, Carolyn?
So something we talk about a lot is the ladder of resolution. So if you will, we start at the bottom rung. So let's say you're having an issue getting your showers when you're supposed to. The first person you may talk to is the aide, but they leave the room, they forgot, they're very busy. Okay. Problem not resolved. We'll go to the next rung. That next person in a personal care home, probably the med tech or whoever the nurse is on duty. Oh, they're not helpful either. They forgot, whatever the case may be. You follow that ladder until you reach resolution. So depending on the facility, the ladder may look a little bit different, but essentially we're looking at the aide, the the med tech, probably the director of nursing, director of wellness. Then above them would be the facilities administrator. And then you've kind of got an option there. That's usually, I would say, when Lisette and I get involved to kind of be a second wing of advocacy for the resident or the family, or also a regulatory body such as the Department of Health or the Department of Human Services can get involved.
And so if you do a grievance form, and what should happen? What would you expect to happen? Are they just gonna fix it, or are they gonna call you? How do you know?
Well,
what they've
what
done?
should happen is once the staff have a grievance form, normally the social worker in a nursing home, they will review it with the team that morning. If it happened the night before, then they'll review it, and then they'll come up with some type of plan of correction. And they should be going back to the resident to say, we understand on this day at this time you had this complaint, and after reviewing it with the team, this is the plan of correction that we're going to do, involving that resident as much as possible. Now, if at that time the resolution isn't to the benefit of the resident, they can always contact the Ombudsman to say, yes, they met with me, but I'm still not satisfied with that resolution, and then we try to be the mediator.
So, Carolyn, you've given a couple examples of common concerns. Are there sort of other ones that maybe we could talk through that would help people?
Yeah, I would say something that comes up a lot actually is food preferences. I think Lisette and I both find that when we go to talk to residents, one of the most common concerns always is the food. So for instance, residents may not know that there has to be an alternative list of options for them. So if a resident says, you know, I keep receiving chicken, I really don't like chicken, something we can do with them is say, all right, let's think through the problem here. You don't like the chicken. What about the always available menu or the alternate meal option? If they say we had no idea that was a thing, great. How can I connect you then with the dietary department to figure out what is the alternative option? Sometimes it goes beyond that. Sometimes you find that there wasn't an alternative option available at all. And that's kind of a different problem. But I would say food is certainly a concern we hear about the most.
Yeah, and I would say skilled nursing, call bell response. Individuals will press their call bell, and someone will come in, unpress that call bell. Someone will be with you, and no one shows, or they take a long time. So with skilled nursing, I would say that's probably one of the top 3 complaints that we get. And then we advise residents or families that the director of nursing would be the one to speak with. And there are facilities that do call bell audits that would allow the staff to know how long it's taking the individuals to answer those call bells.
So do facilities have a certain amount of time that they have to answer your call bell in? Like, do I have to be there in 60 seconds?
Well,
Lisette, I'm putting you on the spot.
I wouldn't say they have to be there in 60 seconds, but they should definitely have some compassion and empathy for these individuals that may not be able to, their toileting needs are on the higher end versus someone who's completely independent. So they should have some type of training that would provide them some adequate response time training to say, yes, not 60 seconds, but 45 minutes, that's way too long. So, you know, I would say an average wait time should be no more than 10, 12 minutes. Or, you know, if the call bell thing is an issue, then obviously have that support plan looked at to see, is it that mom or dad need a support plan to be updated to add maybe a 2-hour toileting schedule to see, hey, if the call bell is an issue, can we do something for that support plan to be updated to support the call bell?
So we kind of always want to be looking proactive, not just the reactive. I think that's a great point. What about situations where people are just unhappy living there?
Yeah.
I always tell people, you're not stuck and you're not trapped. You know, if you've tried all of these things and at the end of the day, you just don't like it, it's not a good fit, that's okay. It happens. You know, you can transfer to a different facility. Usually the staff at the facility is very helpful in submitting referrals to other places. But I would say make sure then that you're visiting ahead of time so that it is a good fit and you feel comfortable there as much as you can.
And what about situations where the resident is voicing a lot of concerns to their family member, you know, to their daughter or their friend, whomever visits regularly, but is not voicing those concerns to the staff? And what can a family member do in that situation?
I think it's important first to educate the individual, the resident, as to what their rights are when they're living in a long-term care facility, and encouraging them. It's very important encouraging them, because the family leaves, the resident stays behind. This is their home, and now they don't know how to advocate for themselves or even express those concerns. So it's just reminding the family member, you know, you are living here now. You're paying for the services. If you're not happy, please speak up, mom, or please speak up, dad. And if it's something that you find that they're having a hard time with, there could be a possibility that they're afraid of retaliation, you know, and so we have to take that into consideration too, where then, you know, let's try to encourage them and empower them and educate them on what they can do, and kind of just have those conversations over and over so that they can have a voice to be able to speak up.
So when people come to you and say that they are fearful of the facility, how do you respond to that?
Residents have a right to be free from retaliation. It's one of the things that we often teach them, but we do have compassion and understanding that it's a real fear. I think part of that is just education as to what their rights are, but then what to do if it does occur. You know, calling our agency to report any kind of retaliation is a good place to start, but also making sure that a trusted staff member at the facility is also made aware so that they can do their due diligence as well.
We're going to link on our website and our Facebook page some information that was shared by the Ombudsman from the National Consumer Voice. And so this gives out some great strategies for families. Advocacy strategies, I think, reiterates what you said, something that people can print. So now if we've gotten to the point where the family and the resident have really advocated, and we touched on this a little bit, they're not getting anywhere. So when should they be calling you to come in?
When they feel that their voice isn't heard and they have a complaint that, although they've tried, absolutely give us a call. And what we do, regardless on where that call comes from, we as advocates, we're resident directed. So we need to meet with that resident. We have to make sure that that resident, A, verifies that yes, that they have the same complaint that the caller placed to us if it's not the resident. And what would they like for us to do? Are they willing to give us permission to speak to the staff on their behalf to address the concerns? Or they just want us to come in and have that conversation with them and educate them on what rights they have? Because sometimes it may take more than one visit from us to be able to say, yes, I am okay with you speaking with the director of nursing about my call bells, or I'm okay with you talking to the dietary staff about, I don't like chicken, but I keep getting it.
So it's very interesting. So the resident has to give permission. So even if the family member wants you to talk, the resident still has to give permission. So what happens if the resident doesn't want to give permission? As we said, you know, some people might be fearful. How would you handle that situation?
If a resident doesn't want to give permission, we try really hard not to push them. It just may not be the right time for them. They may need to trust us a little bit more. We need to visit again to build some rapport. At the end of the day, we have to respect the resident's decision. But as long as we've provided them with education as to what their rights are and encouragement, at the end of the day, it's up to them.
And I will also say too, if the resident doesn't give us the permission, we enter facilities unannounced. So if we know that this is a common issue, or we know that there's a complaint and this particular resident didn't give us the permission, when we're talking with other residents as we're touring, we will ask questions. Well, how's the call bell response? how's the meal? Are you getting alternatives? Are you getting substitutes? So kind of curtailing our questions geared to a complaint that maybe a resident hasn't given us permission, so that then that person may not give us the permission to speak, but maybe someone else is having that same issue. And then also we try to encourage them to attend resident council meetings if there is a resident council in their facility. So maybe they feel that there's strength in numbers when they hear their roommate down the hall has the same issue, but that roommate is able to, speak up. And they're like, oh, you know what? It is okay to express my complaint. Call the ombudsman. I said no last week, but I'm okay with you having that discussion with the staff on my behalf.
And so the last thing I want to talk about is what role do you play with licensing?
Should I just say none? I mean,
yeah.
truly none. It is a common misconception, but we do not play any role in the licensing. We are simply, I always say, like a third-party advocate, if you will. We are there for the residents, but at the end of the day, for licensing, if you're looking at a personal care home or assisted living, that's going to be the Department of Human Services. And if you're in a nursing home, you're looking at the Department of Health. Lisette and I both have all of that information for folks if it does seem like that's the route that they need to go with their complaint, so we can always provide them with kind of the correct avenue.
Yeah.
And so if I want to reach you guys, who do I call? How does this work?
So the best way is to call our main phone number at the Berks County Area Agency on Aging. If you don't know which one of us covers that facility, if you will, you can just tell the receptionist, I need the ombudsman for such and such facility, and they'll connect us.
Terrific. And so they'll just decide when you call in and you say you're in a facility. They'll direct you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. So we have a final minute. Any last things that you want people to know about advocacy or living in a facility?
I will say that if you have a loved one that's looking to transfer into a long-term care facility, be very mindful, have empathy, compassion, include them in the process, and once that decision has been made, they're welcome to contact our agency and ask us as ombudsmen any questions that they might have, but always allow the parent or the person to be a part of the process from A to Z.
Amen.
Great. Terrific. Well, thank you everyone for joining us here today on Aging Matters. Last thing I want to mention is we do currently have our farmers market is ongoing now through September 30th. Qualified seniors are eligible to receive $25 in farmers nutrition checks. To qualify, you must be a resident of Pennsylvania, 60 or over, and meet income guidelines, which are $28,953 for one household, $39,128 for a household of two. Larger households can call our office for guidelines. Checks can be used at participating farmers market on produce that can be grown in Pennsylvania. And when you receive your checks, you will receive all the information about where you can spend these and what you can use them on. And do we have a minute to say this in Spanish? Yes.
Okay. So, nosotros vamos a empezar con la oficina de envejeciente. Tenemos los cheques de la fruta y vegetales. Empieza junio 1 y se termina noviembre 30. Y si cualifica, usted tiene que tener 60 años o más ya para diciembre 31 del 2025. Y si es una persona en su casa, el ingreso no puede ser más de $28,953. Si es dos personas en su casa, no puede ser más de $39,128. Y si es más de dos personas, por favor, nos llama a la oficina al 610-478-6500. Y son 5 cheques que le van a dar y son total $25. Si está interesado, nos puede llamar a la oficina de envejecientes.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today on Aging Matters. Again, for farmers market checks or questions about advocacy, we can be reached at the Area Agency on Aging.